Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the last section of chapter 10. But before we do that, I'm going to look at a formula sheet that is in Schoology. And you're going to notice that there's 3 circles up above and there are 6 circles down below that green line. And if you remember from 10.5, that section, we looked at angles and we looked at where those angles are formed. If I look at the first example here, you'll see that the 2 lines intersect inside the circle. And if you remember, what we did is we took the arcs, we added them together and we divided by 2. And so we took, if I were looking at X, I'd take this arc, arc W, I'd take arc Z, I add them together and divide by 2. If I was looking at angle Y, I'd take V, that arc, and I'd take arc U, I add them together and divide by 2. And so if you remember when we did these problems in section 5, I said this was kind of like the average because the intersection was in the middle. So I take both of the arcs that are created and I add them together and divide by 2. The other one that we took a look at, and let's look at this one. This was the inscribed angle. And if you remember that, what that was is the intersection was on the circle, and we said that the angle is smaller than the arc. And so if you'll take a look, it says x equals half of y. Okay, so that's an inscribed angle. The angle is smaller. Another one that I don't see on here, and I'll draw it down here, is the central angle. Okay, and if I have this being x and I have this being y, and it's the central angle, then angle x is going to equal angle y. Their measures are going to be the same. Right? There is another one, here's one, where the intersection is on the circle, but it's different. This is a tangent line, and this is a secant that comes off of it. And when we looked at that, x is also smaller. It's 1/2 y. So it's very similar to the inscribed angle, very similar to it. The angle is going to be half. So again, that divide by 2 or multiply 2 idea. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the last 3. We're going to take a look at this circle and this circle and this circle. And you're going to notice that the intersection of all 3 of them is outside. It's outside the circle. So this is outside the circle, this is outside the circle, and this is outside the circle. They're all kind of related. And so what I do is I take a look at the angle that's created. Here's an angle that's created. I take the larger arc, I subtract the small arc, and I divide it by 2, which is 1/2 parentheses x minus w parentheses. If I take a look at this next one, again, I've got this angle, the larger arc, which is z, the smaller arc, which is y. I subtract them, the larger from the smaller, and I divide by 2. And then finally, I come down here, I've got angle x. I take the larger arc, because here's my angle, my larger arc, I subtract the smaller arc, and I divide by 2. So those are the different things that we looked at the last chapter. They are all dealing with angles, and that's what's key here. These are all angles. What's different about today is I'm not going to look at the angles, but rather I'm going to be looking at line segments. So these are all different because I'm looking at line segments. Same type of thing. I'm going to have it where the point, the intersection's outside, the intersection's outside, the intersection's inside, but I'm looking at the segments, and that's really important. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. And again, we've got 3 rules. And I'm going to label this one as 1, I'm going to label this one as 2, and I'm going to label this one as 3 as we talk. So if I look at the first one, you're going to notice that the intersection is inside. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take this line segment AC, and you're going to take the other part of it, which is CE, that gives me this. I'm going to multiply those together, and they are going to equal BC times CD. So I just take the lines, I take their parts, I multiply them together, and they equal each other. If I take a look at this next one, okay, how we do that is, again, the intersection is on the outside, and I'm taking a look at the line segments and how they're cut by that circle. So I'm going to take FH, that first part, and then I'm going to take FJ, the whole. So I'm going to take the part and the whole. Then I'm going to take FG, which is the smaller part that's outside, and I'm going to multiply it by the whole, which is FI. And then this last one, it's outside the circle again, okay? But you're going to notice it's a little bit different. I'm going to take KN, notice there's nothing inside the circle, it comes tangent to it, and I'm going to square it. I'm going to multiply it by itself. Then I'm going to take the small part, which is outside the circle, which is KM, and I'll multiply it by the whole line, which is KL. And again, I'm looking at the line segments. So let's go on. I'm going to erase some of these markings. Again, I've got 1, 2, and 3, and we'll look at that when we solve these problems. So let's look at the first one. Okay, notice that the intersection of the two lines is inside the circle. So I've got inside. Because it's inside, am I going to use 1, 2, or 3? I'm going to use number 1 because, again, the intersection's in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 6, which is what I have right there, and I'm going to multiply it by 4. Then I'm going to take 3, and I'm going to multiply it by x. So on these, we're just going to set them up. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. Notice the intersections on the outside, right? Notice that the line goes through the circle and the line goes through the circle. So what I use, 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to use number 2, and the reason why I am is you'll notice the intersection's on the outside and the line is cut twice. So I'm going to come back down and I'm going to go 3, which is this piece, and I'm going to multiply it, that's the part, and now I'm going to do the whole. So the whole then would be x, because that's depicted here. Then the other line, I've got 4, and then I'm going to multiply it by the whole. Now, I don't know what the whole is, but I can figure it out. And that would be 4 plus 8. That would give me that whole piece. And then finally, I'm going to take a look at this one. You're going to notice that this one is like number 3. And the reason why it is because this part right here does not go through the circle so that it creates 2 pieces of a line. It's just 1. And so that gives me that x squared. And then if I take a look at this, then I'm going to take the outside, which is 6, and I'm going to multiply it by the whole. And again, that is 6 plus 4. And I'm going to put parentheses around those because I'm going to add those together before I multiply it. All right, let's keep going. Let's look at this first one. You're going to notice that the intersection is outside the circle, and you're going to notice that one of the lines goes through the circle and cuts it in 2 pieces, but the other one does not. So if I go back up and I take a look, is that 1, 2, or 3? In this situation, it is number 3. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go, okay, I've got the piece that's outside like this. So I'm going to go x squared, because that's x times x. And I'm going to multiply this outside piece times the whole, which is 1 plus 3. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to solve it. X squared equals 1 times 4. X squared gives me 4. I'm going to square root both sides, and x equals 2. All right, now I'm going to go on to the next picture. Okay, notice that the intersection is on the outside. Notice that one of the lines goes through the circle, so there's two parts, and this other line is tangent to it, and it's not cut in two parts. So would this be considered 1, 2, or 3? This one again is number 3, and so let's go back down and let's solve it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go 7 squared, because that's the piece out here. I'm going to take this outside small piece, which is 5, and I'm going to multiply it by 5 plus x. Now again, do not add 5 and x together and think you're going to get 5x. It doesn't work that way because they're not like terms. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to solve it. So I got 7 squared equals 25, which is 5 times 5 times 5x. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm going to go ahead and make this 49. I'm going to subtract 25 from 49, so 5x equals 24. I'm going to divide by 5, so x gives me 4.8. And again, I am not finding angle measure. I'm finding the side, this little piece right here. That's what I'm trying to find. Okay, let's go on and go to this next problem. Notice the intersection of the two lines is outside the circle. Okay, so if I go back and take a look, is it 1, 2, or 3? This one is number 2, and the reason being is you'll notice that when those lines go through the circle, it cuts the lines in two separate spots. So that's why I'm going to use number 3. Now, it doesn't matter which one you choose first. I'm going to choose this one first. So this is 20. This is that short piece outside. So I'm going to go 20 times, and then I'm going to take the whole piece, which is x plus 20. Then I'm going to go equals, and I'm going to take the short piece, which is 18, and I'm going to multiply it by the whole, which is 18 plus 22. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. All right, now let's go ahead and let's use our algebra. So I've got 20x plus 400 equals, and you can solve this any way that you want to. I'm going to use like terms. So I'm going to go 18 times 40. I got 20x plus 400 equals 720. 20x equals 320. Divide by 20, I'm going to get x gives me 16. And again, if you wanted to, right here, if you wanted to distribute that, you definitely could. I chose to bring that together in the parentheses and then multiply. All right, that's those. Now let's come down and let's take a look at this one. Again, if you take a look, the intersection is in the center of the circle. So if I look at the ones that I have, is that 1, 2, or 3? This one is number 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this part, which is x. I'm going to multiply it by 18 because that's the other part. I'm going to set it equal to 9 times the other part, which is 16. If I multiply it together, I get 18x equals 144. Divide by 18, x gives me 8. And again, this is the length of that little piece. That is not the angle measure. That is this little piece right here and how long that is. All right, let's go ahead with this one. You're going to notice that this intersection is in the middle. It's like number 1, the one we just got done with. So I'm going to take one piece, which is 3. I'm going to multiply it by the other piece, which is x. Set that equal to 4 times 6. So I've got 3x equals 24. I'm going to divide by 3. X gives me 6. And that would be units because I'm not doing angle measure. All right, now this one. This one is tricky. And so just take your time on it. You're going to be using the quadratic formula on this one. And you can see it because you'll see that the sides are pretty complicated. So you're going to notice that the intersection is on the outside. And you're going to notice that the two lines go through the circle. So this would be very similar to, if I go back up, number 2. So you'll be doing number 2 on that. So when I go down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3, which is this piece right here, and I'm going to multiply it by this whole piece. So 3 plus x plus 2. Then I'm going to set it equal to, I'm going to take this outside, which is x plus 1. I'm going to put a parenthesis around it because there's 2 terms there. And I'm going to multiply it by the sum of this whole piece. So x plus 1, that's the first piece, plus x minus 1. And I'm going to put it in parentheses. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this together a little bit, make it a little bit nicer. I'm going to go 3 times x plus 5 equals, again, parentheses, x plus 1. And I've got 2x because the x plus the x is 2x, and the 1 minus the 1 gets rid of it, and that's a 0. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some distributive. So I've got 3 times x, which is 3x, plus 3 times 5 is 15. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to take x times 2x, which is 2x squared, plus 1 times 2x is 2x. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it in standards form. So I'm going to subtract 3x from each side. So I've got 15 equals 2x squared, subtract my 3x, and I get a minus 1x. Now I'm going to subtract 15 from each side, so I get 0 equals 2x squared minus 1x minus 15. So really what I did is I got it into something called standard form. Standard form. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out my a. A is 2. B is negative 1. C is negative 15. And you'll remember a couple days ago we did the Pythagorean theorem. So we did, not Pythagorean theorem, we did the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to use this now with that formula. So change color here to make it a little bit easier for you. X equals negative, I'm going to grab b, which is negative 1, plus or minus square root. I'm going to grab my b again, and I'm going to use parentheses, because, especially because it's a negative number. Minus 4 times, I'm going to grab my a, which is 2. I'm going to grab c, which is negative 15. And I'm going to put it all over 2 times a, and a was 2. Okay, now I'm going to keep going. I'm going to firm this up a little bit. I've got minus and negative, so that's a plus. Plus, I'm sorry, 1 plus or minus square root. Negative 1 squared is 1. Then if I take negative 4 times 2 times 15, so 4 times 2 times 15, it's going to be positive. It's going to be plus a 120 all over. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Change color here. 1 plus or minus square root of 121 over 4. Okay, I'm going to split it here. This is kind of what we did before. So I'm going to go 1 plus the square root of 121 over 4. And I can do that with my calculator. The square root of 121 is 11, so 11 plus 1 equals 12. Divided by 4 is, my answer is 3. And then if I come down here, and I've got 1 minus the square root of 121 over 4, that's 1 minus 11, which is negative 10, divided by 4, and I get negative 2.5. And so I've got two answers here, just like what we just got done with quadratic formula. But you can look at it and go, well, what is my answer? Is it 3 or is it negative 2.5? And the answer is 3. Because if I take a look at the picture, I'm looking at the measure of that stuff. I can't have a negative answer. And so I'm going to end up using my positive, and x ends up equaling 3. Okay, let's keep going. Let's do one more together. And again, these are a little bit more difficult. Here's my intersection on the outside. So I'm going to take x right here, and I'm going to multiply it by x plus 3x equals, I'm going to take 8, which is a smaller, and I'm going to add 8 plus x plus 2. So I multiplied the part by the whole. Okay, now I'm going to come down here, and I've got x plus 3x, that is 4x, because they're like terms. I've got 8, and I'm going to bring this together inside the parentheses, which is x plus 10. Okay, here I get 4x squared equals, I've got 8x plus 80, so I distributed. I'm going to get it in standard form, so I'm going to subtract the 8x. I'm going to subtract my 80. Now I have it in standard form. So everything is to one side. My A is 4, my B is negative 8, and my C is negative 80. And again, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug that through. X equals negative 8 plus or minus square root. Again, I got to include that parenthesis there because it's negative. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So I've got the chop there. Okay, negative 8 squared is 64 plus, I've got negative 4 times 80 gives me 1,280 over 8. X equals 8 plus or minus square root. I'm going to take 64 plus that. And I get 1,344 over 8. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it off. I've got x equals 8 plus the square root of 1,344 over 8. And I've got x equals 8 minus the square root of 1,344 over 8. Okay, so you're going to notice that we are really using a lot of the skills that we've learned previously. So I'm going to go ahead then, and I'm going to take 8 plus, and you need to be careful on this, 8 plus the square root of 1,344. And then I'm going to divide it by 8, and I'm going to do it right away because it's kind of a messy answer. So you're going to notice here that this is 5.6. And if I come down here then, and I'm going to take 8 minus that, and I end up with negative 5.7. You're going to notice that your answer then is not going to be the negative, it's going to be the positive, because again, what I'm dealing with is I'm dealing with measure. And when I'm working with measure, I don't work with negative numbers. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Really important that you work with your formula sheets, and you will not be having the formula sheet on your test. So you want to make sure that you understand how to do these and know which formula to use.